This is Help More, Stress Less for volunteer managers, a special session for National Volunteer Week. I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. Volunteering has been a special part of my life for most of my childhood and adult life. And I've been fortunate to be able to sort of follow my personal passion for teaching people how to win over stress. And part of that work is to be able to do a special project every year outside of my usual volunteer work. And so this year, it's been a series of Help More, Stress Less sessions that I've been doing for volunteers and volunteer managers. So thank you for your support. And I'm also really grateful to Citrix, who supports us with webinar seats. As we go through the session, I'd really appreciate it if you could try to stay in your comfort zone. When we talk about burnout and stress, we often talk about very personal things. And so I'd like you to make a decision about how you participate and remember that it's your choice to talk about personal things or not. We are recording the session, and because of that, I'm taking additional steps to make sure that you are able to remain anonymous. So when you send a question to me, it'll be private. Comments that you make that you send through questions don't show your name to the group. And so you'll be able to remain anonymous as we go through the session. And when we have comments and Q&A at the end, if you'd rather not speak, feel free to send it through the private questions. And keep in mind that you can change your mind about participating at any time. And we know that there are a lot of different perspectives and experiences of stress and burnout and issues with working with volunteers. And so please keep in mind that we respect other people's opinions and experiences. If at any time you feel uncomfortable and would like to leave the session, please feel free to do so. Just step out. I have a dashboard that tells me who comes and goes, and I'm a mother. And if you leave suddenly, I will worry about you. And so please check in with me in some way to let me know that everything is okay. So send me a private question that just says, have to run to a meeting, dog needs to go for a walk, or this isn't really comfortable for me, just so that I know that everything is okay. As we go through the content, please feel free to send questions that are private questions, and I will answer them as we go along. Since I'm not able to work with you personally, I'm not able to provide you with individualized health and wellness advice. So if you have any concerns about how you integrate any of the strategies that we talk about today into your personal life because of any health issues, please consult a healthcare practitioner who is familiar with your particular health needs. With that in mind, here we go. So based on the input that I had from all of you when we did the pre-session workshop survey, I've put together some objectives. One is to identify the signs that you may be on the road to burnout. The second is to describe the 3-point stress check for keeping your stress levels under control. The third is to list some rewards and challenges of your job. To be able to describe some strategies that you can use to burnout proof your life and enjoy and get more enjoyment out of working with volunteers. An additional one that came from a lot of your feedback was to be able to describe some of the rewards and challenges. So I'd like to begin by taking a look at the bright side, because I'm very aware of the fact that all of you are giving up your lunchtime, an hour of your day to be here, learning more about how to prevent burnout and to be able to increase your effectiveness and your enjoyment of your work with volunteers. And that speaks to a commitment, something that keeps you going as someone who works with volunteers and coordinates them. And so we need to take a look at some of the rewards that we get from being a volunteer manager, the things that help us keep going when we hit some of the bumps in the road. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of the input that came from doing the survey. Folks talked a lot about the satisfaction that they got when their volunteers had good experiences. Being able to watch volunteers as they progress through the program, to be able to see their growth, and to be able to know that they've had some contribution to the quality of the volunteers' experiences. Another theme that came up was seeing the value in volunteers, that was one of the rewards, knowing that you have got a large number of people who are willing to devote their time, their personal time, to being able to be part of your organization's mission, and to be able to help them succeed because you see the value in what they do and how they're able to help you to extend your work. You also talked about the appreciation that you got from others, the warm fuzzies. Sometimes it's as little or as a smile, a look of appreciation, or sometimes people actually vocalize that, where they will tell you, whether it's the volunteers or the people that your organization serves, that they tell you that they really appreciate what you're doing. Connections and relationships with others was also a theme in what you talked about in terms of the rewards of being a volunteer manager. The relationships that you make with people who have similar perspectives and philosophies because they are part of your organization, whether as a volunteer or as a fellow staff member, and the connections that you make within the community of being part of the organization and the community at large and contributing to it. People talked a lot about some of the personal growth and learning that they achieved by being a volunteer manager. Practical skills, resume building, ways of being able to grow personally from some of the sometimes humbling experiences that you have as a volunteer manager. And then the pride that you have in contributing and making a difference to the community and also to the organization that you're part of. So there are a large number of different rewards that you get from being a volunteer manager. And I'd like you to take a moment and think about what your main rewards are. This is really important because we will often encounter stumbling blocks, hurdles along the way. And recognizing that there's a bigger picture of the rewards that we get from being a volunteer manager puts those into perspective and helps us stay calmer and find solutions to the obstacles, knowing that we've got a greater end in mind. And with that in mind, keeping track also of the sense of purpose, satisfaction that you get from being a volunteer manager and how good it feels to help. Now, there was always also a request to understand the experience of the volunteers. And it was very interesting to look at the responses from the volunteer surveys and the volunteer sessions that we've been doing about what their rewards are. And for them, appreciation from others is a very big piece of the reward for what they do, knowing that they aren't doing this as a paid job. And so they really value the words of appreciation, the little gestures that people make to show that they're valued. They also talk about their connections and relationships with others, and that this is a big part of it for them. The relationships and connections that they make with people within the organization, the people that they support through their volunteer work, and being able to be part of something that's larger than them that they believe in. They also emphasize pride in contributing and making a difference in their community. And for them, they really stress the sense of purpose and satisfaction and how important it is for them to help and feel good about helping. And these are things to keep in mind as you are dealing with some of the questions that come up and some of the challenges as well in terms of motivating, reinforcing volunteers, and also helping them to be able to avoid burnout. Now, we realize that despite all the rewards and all of the positive things that come with working with volunteers within your organization, that even volunteer managers get the blues sometimes. And that you can see that there are times at which we begin the day as a relaxed volunteer manager, we're all ready to go, and that by the end of the day, we're frazzled, worn out, and a little bedraggled. Now, we talk about stress a lot, but we don't necessarily understand what it means to us. And one of the first steps I think will be handy if you haven't done so already is to take a moment to watch the Burnout or Standout video. It, for me, it helps to illustrate some of the more personal aspects of burnout. In addition to that, let's drill down a bit and let's look more closely at stress. I'm a dictionary gal, so I began by going to the dictionary. And when you look up the definition of stress, stress is a challenge, a pressure, a demand. And that's not always a bad thing when you think about it. We actually need to have some challenge in our life. Small amounts of good stress is important to us. We need to have something that motivates us, a challenge, something to look forward to, something that helps us drive. What we tend to be thinking about when we talk about stress is chronic stress or bad stress. What that is when you have large amounts of stress or the stress lasts for too long. Now, we often think that stress is something that just happens to us. And what Lazarus and Folkman help us understand is that we actually play a part in our stress response. That certainly stress provoking events happen, they happen all the time. But between an event and our response to it comes our interpretation. When we experience bad or negative stress, it usually goes along with a negative interpretation. When an event happens, we evaluate it. We weigh the demands of the situation against our resources. We decide if we can cope or not. And if we say to ourselves, this is too much, I haven't done this before, I don't have the skills for this, I'm feeling overwhelmed, yes, then that triggers a stress response, and our palms get sweaty, our thoughts begin to race, our heart begins to pound. But it doesn't have to be like that. Lazarus and Folkman also tell us that when an event happens, we actually have the choice to make a positive interpretation. We can look at the resources that we have and weigh them against the demands of the situation, and we can decide that we have the skills to cope. We can say to ourselves, I've got this. I've done this a million times. This is not an issue for me. I'm just going to go ahead and get this done. And in that case, there will be no heart pounding. There will be no sweaty palms. In other words, a situation is stressful when you decide that it is. And that's something that I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through the different steps in planning how to prevent burnout, because this is the level of control that you can have, how you see each situation. And why do we care so much about chronic stress? Well, we care because it affects us. Chronic stress affects our mind, our body, and our behaviors in negative ways. So those times when you're on an emotional roller coaster or all of your emotions seem negative, when your thoughts seem very negative, when you have headaches, a difficulty concentrating, stomach pains or muscle tension, difficulty eating or sleeping, just feel tired or not like yourself, well, that can be the result of chronic stress. And you can see that if you're experiencing all of these negative effects on your mind, your body, and your behavior, then it's very difficult to be effective as a volunteer manager and in your personal life. Now, for those of you who had a little moment of heart racing when you noticed all of those signs of stress and realized that you're experiencing some of them, not to worry. The effects of chronic stress are preventable and reversible. And that's why we're here. Because your goal as a volunteer manager is to have more great work experiences and less bad stress. And we're going to talk about some simple steps that you can take to be able to achieve this. Let's start at looking at where the challenges come from in your work as a volunteer manager. And we're not doing this to simply complain. It's really important, actually, for us to understand the problem at hand. Too often we feel overwhelmed and we start experiencing a lot of signs of stress. We don't know what's going on and we feel as though everything is wrong. And yet, if we're able to pinpoint the actual challenge that we're dealing with, it allows us to be able to have a focused and effective solution. So one of the things that we found is that volunteer managers juggle a lot. In the survey that you completed, we found that more than 52% of you reported that it wasn't one particular area of stress that you were dealing with, whether it's your health, the family, or finances, or even your volunteer work or work, but actually that your stress came from juggling a multitude of things. And that's something to keep in mind when we talk about the different kinds of stress busters and different things that you can do to realize that part of what you're dealing with is the fact that the bottom line is you've got a lot going on. In addition to these outside things that you're dealing with, sometimes, unfortunately, we're our own enemies. And some of the stress that we experience comes from our own thoughts and behaviors. Negative self talk. We often are very critical of ourselves. So we put ourselves down and we devalue our accomplishments. Oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, anybody could have done that. Oh, you're always messing things up. All of these negative things that we say to ourselves. In addition, sometimes we worry a lot. And I think of worrying as rehearsing failure. We think over and over again of all the things that could go wrong, and inevitably they will. And also catastrophizing, where we make a mountain out of a molehill. And at the same time, the very behaviors, these helping behaviors that bring us to organizations in which we help others, can sometimes backfire. And we can fall into a few possible traps. For example, being a martyr, always being self-sacrificing, even though you don't particularly want to be. Helping excessively, not really knowing when to draw the line, and sometimes giving too much to your own detriment. And then rescuing, desperately, persistently trying to help someone or something that doesn't want our help and hasn't asked for our help. So keep in mind that there are things that we do in terms of our negative self-talk and our negative helping behaviors that are actually a source of stress as well. When we went through the feedback from the survey, there are a couple key challenges that people reported that came from their work as a volunteer manager. And I'm going to share these, and as we do this, I'd like you to look at them, at those that were reported by your fellow volunteer managers, and think about them in relation to your own. And I'd like you to identify for yourself the number one challenge that you're facing, because I'd like you to keep this in mind as we talk about the solutions so that we can tailor the solutions to match the challenge. Not enough volunteers. Ever-growing program needs volunteers. Trying to get new volunteers. So this whole issue of just not having enough volunteers to be able to do the work that it takes to try to find new volunteers, and knowing that the positive side is that your program's expanding, the negative is that you don't have enough volunteers to be able to keep it going. And alongside of that, not having enough funding to be able to support volunteers if you bring them on. Trying to reinforce participation activities of volunteers, trying to understand how to provide recognition for volunteers, trying to understand what causes their burnout and helping them prevent burnout. And these are all part of that bigger problem of recruiting and retaining volunteers. Really trying to understand them, be able to recruit more, find out what it takes to be able to keep them in the fold. People talked a lot about interpersonal relationships with volunteers. Always feeling a pressure to have to know the answers and having to be sure that you have the right answers for your volunteers. Having to deal with irresponsible volunteers. They make a commitment, but they don't necessarily follow through. Having some volunteer personalities that are just difficult to deal with. Just finding it challenging to have to deal with a lot of different types of personalities. A lot of people who are very different from yourselves. and having to find different ways of being able to interact effectively with each one. Dealing with volunteers who aren't willing to do the right thing. This is something that came up in different ways. That they may have a different set of ethics or values, and that it may be along the lines of not being able to do the right thing ethically, and then also at a practical level, not being able to follow through on instructions, just not being able to do what they've been asked to. Trying to find a way of just keeping them motivated as part of your relationship. The ongoing dilemma of seeing them begin as very excited, enthusiastic volunteers and always worrying if that's going to wane. The other category revolves around dealing with the organization in which you work. And there are a number of aspects to that, whether it had to do with paperwork, the processes that are in place to actually, in the end, make your life more easier and more effective, but the actual process may be difficult. Dealing with the culture. Every organization has its own flavor, and with each one that you go to work for, you have to learn how to navigate the culture. Deadlines, so that you're managing volunteers who are on their own schedules in their personal lives, but at the same time, you have to meet the deadlines that are related to your organization. And then the ever-present issue of funding. On a personal level, the volunteer managers who responded to the survey talked a lot about overwhelming demands, feeling pressure to do more, not being able to say no, feeling as though they have to take on the world, and trying to find time to do it all. And someone mentioned, well, the more that you help, the more that you want to volunteer more. And that even as a volunteer manager, many of you are also volunteering in different sectors. And that you have, as a result, you've got various things competing for your attention that you're perpetually juggling. And that sometimes these demands overwhelm. And ultimately, you're struggling to find a way to balance it all. So these are the main areas reported by volunteer managers. I wanted to take a step back and take a look at what the volunteers themselves talked about. They had some parallel issues. Dealing with the organization was a big piece of the challenge that they reported experiencing in volunteering. Trying to figure out the culture, your expectations, the deadlines, the paperwork, and also being aware that you have funding issues and trying to find a way to deal with that. They talk about feeling pressured, and volunteers are typically very much doers, people who are a very active part of their community and their personal lives, and they mirrored your concerns about just feeling pressured to take on the world and not having enough time to do it all. Volunteers talked about the interpersonal issues that they dealt with in dealing with staff of the organizations at which they volunteer, of dealing with fellow volunteers, and then of dealing with the people that they're helping. So they actually encounter a lot of challenges around interpersonal aspects at all facets. And they also talk about not having enough volunteers or time or money, and they feel that pressure. So that they feel the pressure to try to do more, even when they don't have the time or resources in their own personal lives, because they're very aware of the fact that the organization doesn't have enough people or money to be able to do all that's needed, and they're very committed to helping to further your mission. They also talk about the challenge of seeing others in distress. Part of what draws them to volunteering is being able to help to alleviate distress, whether it's humans, animals, others, and at the same time, they find that very difficult to deal with. So hopefully that perspective on the volunteers also helps you with some of your challenges in being able to manage your relationships with them. So we have a sense of what we're dealing with. It's time to take control of your stress levels. Now, in the old days, I used to simply bang my head against the wall, and I realized over time that that wasn't really working for me. And so we're going to take a slightly different strategy today. Basically, what I've done is I have distilled this entire program into 4 simple steps. Scanning your environment as you go through the day. Stop, learning how to stop the stress cycle once you've identified that you're stepping into the chronic stress or negative stress zone. To step into your stress-free zone by using stress busters. And to start afresh at the end of every situation. And so the nice thing about these 4 steps is that you don't have to go out and learn anything new today. You don't have to change your diet. You don't have to practice handstands. You don't have to start running. You simply think about what your skills already are, and you look at ways in which you can pull all of those together to be able to use these 4 steps. So we're going to begin with scanning and using the 3-point stress check. For me, this is a really fast, easy, and very effective way to keep an eye on your stress levels as you go through the day. And I'd like you to do this along with me. You begin by checking your shoulders, because your shoulders are often the culprits. As you go through the day, many of us tend to hold our tension in our shoulders, and our shoulders gradually become more tense and creep up towards our ears. Check your shoulders. Are you holding tension there? Then you check your breathing. Your breathing is a dead giveaway. There are 2 types of stress breathing. The first, which most people are commonly aware of, is when your breathing becomes rapid and more shallow. You begin to pant. The second is when you hold your breath, or when your breathing slows down in an exaggerated manner. So check your breathing. Are you breathing faster, or are you breathing more slowly than usual? Now, if you're just not aware, actually, of how your breathing changes, then the next time you're in a situation when you find yourself just losing it, check in with yourself. Check your breathing. Put your hands on your chest or your diaphragm and just feel whether your breathing rate is increasing or if your breathing is slowing down. Now, as we saw before, Lazarus and Folkman tell us that a situation is stressful once you decide that it is. So if your heart is pounding and your palms are sweating, it's because you've said something negative to yourself. I can't cope. This is too much. I can't do this. And so it's important to check your thoughts. Too often these negative thoughts tend to just be so commonplace for us that they slip by unnoticed. But it's really important to be able to check in with yourself and start recognizing these thoughts. So you go through the day and you scan, and what do you do when you notice that your stress level is starting to increase? Well, then it's time to take some action to lower your stress. I love the quick stress buster. So this is my go-to strategy for being able to keep my stress level in check as I go through the day. So I check in with myself, and if I notice areas of tension, then I deal with them. So I'd like you to follow along with me because this makes more sense when you actually do it. So check your shoulders, and you notice that you're wearing your shoulders as earrings. They're just up around your ears. So you need to lower your shoulders and let that tension go. So if you simply drop your shoulders, you'll find that it doesn't really relax them that much. So I'd like you to make big circles. Roll your shoulders back and then roll your shoulders forward. Raise them, give them a shake, drop them, and now let that tension go. Should feel a bit better. Now, I realize that when you're in a professional situation, it's a little tricky to be doing these big shoulder rolls. So I'm going to give you my little professional cheat. This is what I do to be able to relieve my shoulder tension when I'm in front of people and no one even notices what's going on. I'd like you to raise your shoulders a centimeter. For those of you who aren't metric, half an inch, just enough so that you can feel the muscles of your shoulders starting to engage. And now hold it there. It's just a touch. No one will even see your shoulders moving. And so just continue whatever you're doing. So you can be talking to someone, you can be doing anything as you hold this teeny bit of tension in your shoulders, and you hold that. You hold it for a few seconds as you continue with your activity, and now let it go. Let your shoulder drop. And you'll notice that if you lower your shoulders after holding that bit of tension for a while, that the tension seems to seep away. And so that's what you can do in a professional situation. So that's number one, change your shoulders. Number two is change your breathing. And this for me is the cornerstone. If there's anything that you take away from today, is that when you start to find your stress levels skyrocketing, then breathe. And there's a special way to breathe. The first thing that's important is breathing in through your nose. And we do this for two reasons. First of all, it slows your breathing down. Try to take 10 breaths really quickly through your nose. It's really hard, isn't it? It is next to impossible to hyperventilate when you're breathing through your nose. So as your stress level increases and you find yourself really wanting to start breathing through your mouth, force yourself to close your mouth and breathe in through your nose. The second reason why you breathe in through your nose is because it warms and moistens the air. When you breathe in and out through your mouth, it dries your mouth, and that sort of intensifies that whole stress experience. So the air goes in through your nose, and then you breathe it out through your mouth. Breathing out through your mouth allows you to maintain some pressure in your airways as you exhale. And to improve on that, you purse your lips. You make your lips into a nice round O as you breathe out. So the air goes in through your nose, and you breathe it out through pursed lips. And that helps to relax the muscles of your neck and to keep the airways open as you breathe out. Now, the thing to keep in mind is when you're in a professional situation, making a big O with your lips may not be the most appropriate thing. So you can simply have your lips slightly parted, your teeth just a little bit apart. Breathe in through your nose and then sigh the air out through your mouth. So you've changed your shoulders, and now you've changed your breathing, and now we get to your thoughts. And as we've said before, a situation is stressful when you decide that it is. And this is the point at which you stop that hamster wheel of stressful thoughts that you have in your head. Now, the goal is to change your thoughts and switch them to something positive. I don't know about you, but when I'm falling apart and just crashing and burning, I can't think warm, fuzzy thoughts. You go, girl. You've got this, CK. Oh my gosh, CK, you are awesome. This is wonderful, CK. Great job. I can't do it. I just can't do it. But what I can do is I can think neutral thoughts. So what I do when I notice that my stress level is going up is I think about my grocery list. 3 cans of peas, 1 quart of milk, 1 bag of rice. And for me, that stops that hamster wheel of crazy thoughts, and it allows me to compose myself and take my thoughts in a different direction. I'd like you to pause for a moment here, and I'd like you to think about what you can use as your neutral list. Are you going to think of your favorite magazines, your favorite types of chocolate, your favorite dogs? And take a moment right now and pick your neutral list, because the next time that you're in a stress-provoking situation, trust me, it'll be very difficult to start coming up with a list at that point. So let's take a quick pause and pick what your neutral list is going to be. So the quick stress buster is a great start, but it's really not enough to get you through every situation. And so let's look a bit at different stress busters that you can use. Stress busters help us control our stress, and I've organized them into 7 different categories that we're going to walk through. And we will share some of the responses that I got on the survey. And as we go through them, I'd like you to look at the ideas that people are suggesting and see how some of them may fit with for you. And also, as you think about them in your own, look at how those match to the different challenges that you talked about that you're dealing with. So let's begin with physical stress busters. There's a lot that we can do with our bodies and for our bodies that help us manage the effects of stress and control our stress levels. So whether it focuses on your diet by eating well or making sure you stay hydrated, whether you do breathing exercises, getting some sort of physical activity, whether you're into sports, simply like to take walks or garden or get outside and swim, or using relaxation techniques such as yoga, making sure that you get enough sleep, regardless of what you need to get done. And for those of you that can nap, put getting some naps in there as well. So there are a wide range of strategies that you can use. There are also mental stress busters. These are things that you can do in your mind or for your mind. And this encompasses a range of different things. And when I say for your mind, it includes things that you can learn. So this can include focusing on positive things, planning how you're going to address stress-provoking situations, using mental relaxation techniques like meditation, changing how you see things, looking at your evaluation and reframing it, and thinking about what you've learned from past situations and looking at it in a more positive light. And then also reminding yourself of the rewards, why you're doing what you're doing. Personal support. We can't stress this one enough. Being alone, being isolated increases our perceptions of our stress levels. And so making connections and having support from people, pets, plants, whatever we can connect to is really critical. And so there are a wide range of ways in which we can connect with people in our daily lives, whether it's friends, family, the people that we work with, participating in social activities in the community, um, or we can connect with our pets, our animals, and for some people, spending time and talking with their plants. Even that's a way for them to be able to vent and to be able to deal with some of the stress that they're experiencing. And keep in mind that not everyone that we communicate with or get support from has to be in our personal lives, that there are a wide range of professionals and paraprofessionals that are able to be unbelievably supportive as well. Emotional stress busters. It's really important that we vent. And we need to find ways of being able to deal with our emotions and get them out of our system because we can't ignore them. When we try to pretend they don't exist or bury them, they simply pop up in another form. So being able to find ways to vent it. You can deal with it by avoiding the people and the activities and the situations that cause you stress, or you can talk it out, scream it out, pound it out, journal it out. Find different ways to be able to vent as long as they are positive for everyone involved. Getting organized. It is uncanny how much disorganization can contribute to our stress levels. The feeling that we get when we walk into our space and our desk is an absolute clutter, or we haven't got our schedule organized. And so getting organized is a very useful way of being able to deal with some of the challenges, especially around feeling overwhelmed and having a lot of demands. So whether you clean, make lists of things to do, focus on your priorities, manage your calendar, be able to stay focused on your commitments. Watch out for being overcommitment and make sure that you're prioritizing and protecting your own time. Someone also mentioned managing up, and that is managing the organization in which you work. And that's something to keep in mind, to be able to understand and how the organization works, to see how you can best navigate it. And sometimes we just need to take our mind off things. And it's okay to do so, to look at something that you do with your hobbies, or sometimes just to do nothing, just have dead time on the sofa. But whatever you do, find some way to just take your mind off things so that you can stop processing. Now, I have spiritual at the end, but that is by no means saying that it's less important than the others. And by spiritual strategies, I'm encompassing religion and beyond, being able to look at our spiritual selves, connecting with our inner being, and thinking of where we fit into to nature and the world around us. And so often when we start to feel overwhelmed and stressed, it's because we are not connecting with ourselves, that we're sort of losing track of why we're here, what we're doing, and taking time for ourselves. And so find a way to be able to connect with your spiritual side, your personal side, and to have some time for yourself to be quiet. And whether you journal, hike, meditate, pray, do yoga, or something, find a way to connect with nature, the world around you, and yourself. So we have a wide range of these stress busters in these 7 categories. And what I'd like you to do is to take a moment, go back to that challenge that you were dealing with. And for many of you, it revolved around being able to deal with recruiting and retaining volunteers, and also for just having way too much going on in your lives. And think about what you can use in each category. And I'd like you to take a moment and just jot something down. What are 2 key stress busters that you can use to deal with your particular challenges? And now, when we realize that part of the challenge that you face comes from your work with your volunteers, giving what you know about the challenges that they're facing in terms of dealing with the organization in which they're volunteering, the interpersonal relationships that they struggle with, the fact that they're also dealing with a lot of demands. What could you encourage your volunteers to use as some of these strategies so that you can help them prevent burnout? And by helping to retain them, that will also help to decrease some of your stress. Now, before you use a stress buster, it's important to evaluate them. And there's 3 key questions. Is this a positive strategy, or is it going to cause problems? We can think of obvious things that will cause problems. For example, we can pick recreational drugs. Sure, they take your mind off the issue at hand for a moment, but we know that long term they can create their own problems. And yet, there are many positive things that, if used to excess, can also cause issues for us. For example, exercise. It's great to be able to work out now and then. However, if your workout and the need to be in the gym for hours on end is starting to eat into your other activities, then exercise may not be a positive strategy anymore. The second question is this an appropriate strategy for the time and place? Chanting may make you feel great, but in a meeting with your volunteers, it may not be appropriate. And then finally, is this a short-term strategy or a long-term strategy? If you're spending a lot of time putting band-aids on a situation, then you may want to step back and have a long-term strategy. So those are the questions that you ask yourself, and you get yourself through the situation and bring yourself to the very last step, what I call starting afresh. How many of you, at some point during the past week, have replayed a conversation that didn't go as well as you wanted it to and planned what you could have said? You know when you do that? Oh, yeah. And that's when I could have said, well, you don't really value me. And if I just walked out right then, maybe she'd have gotten my point. But what do we find happens when we start replaying these situations? You may notice that your body actually starts re-experiencing all of the physical sensations, that you actually start to re-experience the very emotions that you had then. you're actually replaying the stress response. And so it's really important that when a situation is over, to put it behind you so that instead of weighing yourself down with the burden of a lot of past stress, that you can start each situation with a clean slate. And keep in mind that whatever you did at that point in time was the best that you could have with who you were and what you knew at that point in time, and then move on. I know, easier said than done, but it's really important to practice. And as you start thinking about it, you simply say to yourself, move on. Allow yourself to learn. We spend too much time beating ourselves up for not doing things correctly. When you go through a situation, do an evaluation, identify what you can do differently next time, build that into your repertoire, and as I said, move on. Start small. Too often, as helpers, we tend to have that personality where we want to fix things and fix them quickly, and we jump in and take on everything all at once. And it's really important to start very small. Take one small piece of that entire huge puzzle that you have to deal with, manage it effectively, and then move on from there. And as you're doing that, it's important to be flexible. Too often, the biggest source of stress is sticking to a plan that's just not working. And so that you may have committed, you may have said, well, this is what I'm going to do. But if it's not working, it's really important to switch to plan B. And if plan B isn't working as well, then improvise. But don't stick to something that clearly isn't being effective. And take it slowly. We hear time and time again that the human psyche is like a rubber band, that if you try to change yourself too quickly, that it'll snap or just spring right back into place. And when you stretch slowly and you grow slowly, then you're able to accommodate to that. And then finally, believe in yourself. And many people will raise their eyebrows and say, well, that's really hokey. But think about it. As you're going through that appraisal, that evaluation of the situation when you decide if it's stressful or not, if you believe in your skills and all of the skills and talents that you bring to that situation, then you're more likely to make the decision that you've got that situation under control. Believe in yourself. So there we have it. Scan, stop, step, and start. 4 easy steps that you can take. I'd like to leave you with a quote that I wish was mine. It's so brilliant. To be free of destructive stress, don't sweat the small stuff and realize that all stuff is small. So I'd like to open it up for questions and comments. And for those of you who aren't comfortable with your doing questions here or just haven't thought of any yet, please feel free to contact me in any way that you need. Email or find me on Facebook. You can also find me on Twitter, and I post stress busting tips with the hashtag #HelpMoreStressLess. How does this relate to your volunteers and the issues that you're dealing with recruitment and retention? I've shared with you a lot of their pain points and things that can help you understand how to motivate them. And so I'm hoping that that will be helpful. One of the things that's also useful for your volunteers, and that's part of the reason why I'll send out the volunteer stress busting booklet, is if you want to share that with them. 60 Stress Busters for Volunteers is a nice concrete little set of steps which gives them some strategies for being able to deal with their own stress and burnout. So that's a big piece, helping them to recognize what their sources of stress are. And by them being able to manage their own burnout, then it helps with your retention. Because too often, one of the big sources of volunteer dropout isn't necessarily lack of recognition, but with some of the research that I did recently, I was really astonished to find out the very high percentage of burnout among volunteers. And that actually is one of the largest contributors to a volunteer dropout. And so being able to educate them about this and send them information or get them to hop on and get some stress tips on Twitter, etc. Any other questions before we wrap? And then finally, where to start for you. Take a look at your key challenges and then go back and think about the stress busters that you can use and match the stress busters to challenges. And then take a moment to ask yourself those 3 questions to evaluate them and select the ones that are most appropriate. So I hope you find the 4 basic steps useful. And good luck to all of you. And I wish you well.